Verdansk has officially left Warzone forever. Or at least that's what they say. I think we all know that Verdansk is never truly completely off the table. But still, I wanted to shake things up and do a little Warzone retrospective, specifically about Verdansk. So I'll probably put up the most nostalgic Warzone gameplay that I still have saved on my computer behind me, and I kind of just want to slow down for a second and look back at Verdansk. You know, I don't have a script or anything written out, so this is going to be kind of a more laid-back video, but I want to talk about the legacy that I think Verdansk is going to leave behind, not only in Warzone, but in Call of Duty as a whole. Of course, being somebody who has played a lot of Warzone, especially over the pandemic, and I bet a lot of you guys out there are in the same boat, Verdansk means a lot to me. You know, it has a special place in my heart. So today, we're going to kick back and get a little closure. So what do you guys say we start by going back in time to when Verdansk was first released, which was, of course, with the release of Warzone itself. Now, to be honest with you guys, I wasn't playing a lot of Modern Warfare at the time. I wasn't playing a ton before Warzone came out, and that's because I just wasn't really digging Modern Warfare. I think since then, I've kind of seen the light, and I've realized that Modern Warfare was a great quality Call of Duty game, but at the time I wasn't playing it so much. So when Warzone came out, I was a little bit skeptical, and when I first hopped into Verdansk, I had kind of that same feeling. Verdansk is a really bland looking map, especially when you compare it to other battle royales. The other two big ones being Apex Legends and Fortnite, of course. If you compare Verdansk to the maps in those games, it's night and day. Verdansk is pale and dry. It almost has a cold look to it. Like, I've always imagined that being in Verdansk, it would be pretty cold there. And that was kind of my first impression of the map visually, but also design-wise, it kind of gives off the same vibe. There's not a lot of interesting POIs in Verdansk. It's all really kind of feels realistic. Like, when you look at it, it almost feels like it could be a real place. Now, to be fair, I think that's actually what they were going for with Verdansk. Of course, that was kind of the feeling behind Modern Warfare as a whole. It was supposed to feel realistic and gritty, and I think that that's the one aspect of Verdansk that I eventually came around to, that I eventually started to like. Verdansk, like Modern Warfare, has these buildings with very realistic proportions. So for example, doorways and hallways feel really tight in Verdansk. I don't think a lot of people realize this, but for the most part in video games, something like a hallway is going to be a little bit bigger than it would be in reality. I guess that's just the way that video game design normally is, just to give the player more space. But for Modern Warfare, they wanted it to feel more real, and that same design philosophy carried into Verdansk. And like I said earlier, this is the one thing that I really like about Verdansk, and I think that this actually separates Warzone from Fortnite or Apex Legends. You have these really intense encounters, you know, when you're checking corners, you're walking down hallways, everything feels so tight, it feels so real. And I think in large part, that feeling and that style of gameplay has really come to define what is Warzone. Because Verdansk had so many of those fights, you know, going up stairways or checking doors, that is kind of the gameplay that we think of when we think of Warzone. And that's because of the fact that Verdansk itself kind of pushes you towards those fights. It puts you in that dense downtown situation, you know, where you're walking up the stairwell and you know there's a guy up there. Or you're going up the stairs to clear the attic of that one house. That one house design is like everywhere in Verdansk. You guys know which one I'm talking about. That to me is Warzone, and I love that. I hope that moving forward, Warzone will still continue to incorporate that style of gameplay. But beyond that, like I said, you know, my initial impression of Verdansk is that it felt really boring and really empty. And at the time, I kind of assumed that that was on purpose, you know, because the precedent had already been set by Fortnite and Apex Legends that a battle royale map evolves as it moves forward. So I thought that they were purposefully leaving this map really barren with lots of wide open empty space so that they could eventually start cramming more stuff into it. And I guess that kind of leads me into the next part of this retrospective that I wanted to mention, which is how Verdansk changed over time. Spoiler alert, it didn't really change that much. So I think we were all expecting substantial changes. Like I just said a second ago, that was the precedent. Of course, Warzone was massively popular, so it wasn't, you know, there was no question of resources. Of course, they could make all the changes that they wanted to with the map. But the seasons go on, and we never really saw any huge changes to Verdansk. If I'm remembering right, I think the first big change that we got was the opening of Stadium in, I think that was Season 3 or possibly Season 4. And I'll admit, that was a pretty cool change, especially because that was something that people were kind of specifically asking for. I remember everyone was really frustrated with the stadium. Everyone wanted to go into it, and that was kind of like a a popular topic of discussion, and they actually did that, so that was pretty cool. But obviously in the larger scope of Verdansk, that's not the biggest change. And apart from that, the other big changes to Verdansk that I can remember pre-Cold War, of course, we're gonna talk about the Cold War integration in a second, but before that, the other big changes that I remember are the train. I'm pretty sure the train came after launch, if I'm not mistaken, which is a cool addition, and I like the train. It's not a lot, of course. I'd prefer to get, you know, more POIs rather than that train, but still the train was cool. And then we got the subway system, if you guys remember, was like a way to fast travel around Verdansk. A little too similar to the train system. I don't know why they would it's kind of weird that they added both of those things in, but we got the train and we got the subway. And then on top of that, we had the stadium opening up. And I think those are kind of the biggest things that I remember happening to Verdansk pre-Cold War, which to me anyway was hugely disappointing. And I don't want to come off, you know, like I'm complaining too much, because I still did enjoy playing Warzone a lot during this time period. I played so much Warzone over the pandemic, man. But I was always left thinking, like, why don't they shake things up with Verdansk? Why are we still playing the same Verdansk? And even color-wise too. Like I said, Verdansk had a really boring color palette. And when you look at the precedent, like Fortnite and Apex, I know I keep saying that, but they're kind of just the best frame of reference, I think. The colors of those maps are constantly changing. And you can look at gameplay from Apex Legends, for example, and it's pretty easy to tell what season that gameplay is coming from. That is definitely not the case with Warzone. Verdansk looked pretty much the same for the entirety of the first 6 seasons. So in the beginning, I didn't hate Verdansk. I definitely didn't love it. And as time went on, you know, I started to get a little bored with it. They weren't changing it as much. I did start to appreciate those close quarters, you know, that kind of realistic design that I already mentioned. But overall, I was just getting a little frustrated that they wouldn't change it. And that's what leads us to the Black Ops Cold War Warzone integration, which I think is something that will live in infamy. When you start seeing those documentaries pop up on your YouTube about the downfall of Warzone, I guarantee that this will be the first thing that everybody points to as kind of like the beginning of the end of Warzone. So for starters, after Season 6 of Modern Warfare, Black Ops Cold War comes out and they restart the season, so they start counting at Season 1. And Season 1 of Black Ops Cold War basically came with no changes to Verdansk. I think there might have been some small things if I remember right, but the big thing was the addition of Rebirth Island, which we won't talk about too much in this video because, like I said, this is kind of it's a Verdansk retrospective. Maybe one day we can do one of these for Rebirth too. But the bottom line is that Black Ops Cold War comes out, there's a new season of Warzone, and not really any changes to Verdansk. That is until the next season of Black Ops Cold War, and they all this time have been kind of hyping up a 1980s version of Verdansk, which is a really cool idea. I remember hearing about that and I thought that that was gonna be awesome. I was really psyched for it. And to give credit where credit's due, when this happened, when we got Verdansk 1984, this was easily the biggest change to Verdansk that we ever saw throughout its entire lifetime. This was a massive change. So not only did they add a lot of POIs and kind of just gave a general cosmetic change to all the buildings, but they also added in this greenish yellowish filter over the entire game. So if you go back and look at original Verdansk gameplay, it looks, like I said, the colors there were never good, but it does kind of just look normal. If you look at Verdansk 1984 side by side with that, it's like you start to wonder, what were they thinking when they added in this disgusting piss filter over the entire game? Like, I honestly don't know how this type of thing ever gets to be live in the game. Like, I could understand, you know, if behind the scenes in development they're kind of messing with it, tweaking some colors, but at some point before this goes live, somebody has got to say, hey, you know what, that doesn't really look that good. But all the same, we got our yellow greenish filter over the game, and we have our 1980s version of Verdansk. But we did get some pretty big POI changes with Verdansk 1984. I remember we got a Summit up in the mountains of Verdansk. That whole area was redone. They redid Superstore, which, by the way, I can't believe I haven't mentioned this yet, but Superstore is definitely my favorite part of Verdansk. Literally ever since day one of Warzone, that was my drop spot. For some reason, me and my friends playing at the time, we were just drawn to Superstore. I guess everybody else was too, because that kind of became the hotspot of Verdansk. And man, dropping Superstore was so much fun. The thing that I really like about Superstore is that It's this large, confined space. So there's lots of space inside of it, but you know you can't get hit from some guy sniping out on the mountains. Not to mention the loot there was really good. A lot of the time there was a shop that would spawn right out front, so you could drop in, you were guaranteed some action, you were guaranteed some good loot, and then you could get your loadout really quickly. Yeah, sorry, this is kind of a tangent right here, but I did want to mention this. I loved Superstore in Verdansk. So going back to Verdansk 1984, they did add in a lot of new POIs. It wasn't like a completely redone map, that's for sure. It generally still felt the same. We had our green filter over everything, so everything looked different, but it generally still played exactly like Verdansk, in my opinion, at least. And when this first came out, I thought it was a step up from the original Verdansk. I remember doing some streams. We might even have a video here on this YouTube channel where I'm talking about it and I'm saying that 1984 Verdansk is better than the original Verdansk. But as time went on, I started to realize that, number one, I hated the way that Verdansk looked. I can't even look at gameplay of that Verdansk. And two, I didn't really like the new POIs that they added in. It just didn't really feel like Verdansk to me. And that actually makes a lot more sense when you consider the fact that at this point, Infinity Ward, who created Warzone and designed Verdansk, is no longer working on Verdansk or Warzone. So this overall for Warzone was a period of an identity crisis. Warzone had no idea what it was at this point. And the same thing goes for Verdansk. Verdansk was just like this hodgepodge of disgusting colors and weird weapons that were in the game and these random POIs squished together. It was not a good look for Warzone. And as time went on, I started to realize that OG Verdansk was way better. But still, I was happy that they at least, changed the map. In my opinion, Warzone being the type of game that it is, being as big as it is, I kind of expected changes to the map at that scale pretty much every season. Maybe I'd be asking too much, but again, if you look at other battle royales, they can pretty much achieve basically that. And then as Cold War's life cycle goes on, Verdansk, like they do every season, there's some small changes. There's some very minimal changes. But for the most part, it's like they just didn't even care at this point. Like, they murdered Verdansk, and then they let its corpse just sit there and rot for 6 seasons of Cold War. I don't understand what was going on. I can vaguely remember, some satellites crashing. I should mention the Die Hard crossover was pretty cool. So Warzone did a crossover with Die Hard, which is, of course, a movie from the 80s with Bruce Willis, and they even added in a POI from the movie into Verdansk, this massive building in downtown Verdansk. That was pretty cool. I gotta admit, that was definitely the coolest thing that happened to Verdansk throughout Cold War's life cycle. So yeah, time goes on, they're not really adding in a ton of POIs. Of course, the map still looks disgusting, like I mentioned, and it seemed like they were focusing all their efforts on dumping as many weapons into the game as they can. And the disrespect towards Verdansk at this point is unbearable, even coming from me. Like I said, I was never in love with Verdansk, but it was the OG, and you gotta put some respect on its name. But along comes Cold War, and it just slaughters it, man. It's depressing, it really is. And that's pretty much where the story of Verdansk ends. Like I said, 6 seasons of Cold War went on. There were some small changes here and there, but nothing really too big, or at least nothing memorable. Like I said, I played plenty of Warzone. I definitely played less during the Cold War era, but I played plenty, and off the top of my head, I'm not remembering a ton of great things that they did to the map. So let's move on to the final part of this retrospective that I wanted to hit on, and that is the legacy of Verdansk. How do I think people will remember this map? Well, first things first, Verdansk is the OG Warzone map, and that right there is enough to make it very popular among players. We all know the power of nostalgia. It's honestly only a matter of time before people start clamoring for Raven Software to put back into the game Verdansk. It's literally only a matter of time. In fact, I bet by the time you're watching this, whenever you're watching this, there is already a movement. There's already a group of people who are begging for Raven Software to put Verdansk back into Warzone. And some of those people, I'm sure, genuinely enjoyed Verdansk. But I think most of them will be blinded by nostalgia. It's kind of like the same thing that we saw with Fortnite. When Fortnite moved from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2 and brought in a new map, of course, there were all these people clamoring for the original Chapter 1 map to be brought back. And that's mainly because everybody has these great memories with that map, you know? They feel like if they could just bring that map back, then they would have as much fun with the game that they used to. When we all know that's not really the case, right? You can't get those first couple games back. You'll never be able to have that same experience again, because now, you know, it's all old news. That initial magic is gone. Not that it can't still be fun, because sure, it can still be fun for sure. It's just not going to be that same experience ever again. So I think that's really important to remember with Verdansk, because I think we're all going to look back at it with our rose-tinted glasses on. But like I've said multiple times throughout this retrospective, Verdansk, you know, it wasn't perfect. There were some things that I really liked about it. In hindsight, one thing that I really loved about that period of OG Verdansk is that the game, you know, the map, it just knew what it was. It had a strong sense of character and identity, something that was definitely lost after Cold War came into the picture. Verdansk knew what it wanted to do, and it did it really well. So I think the legacy of Verdansk is going to be very, very positive. I don't see a lot of people trashing Verdansk in the future. I think we're all gonna reminisce about those Superstore drops and talk about how awesome the game used to be. And, you know, that's partially true. The game was really fun back then. There is definitely nostalgia that comes into play with that conversation. Just like I already mentioned, people kind of chasing that initial high that they had with the game. But there's no denying that those were really great times, and that Verdansk actually did provide some great Warzone gameplay. Like I said in the beginning of this video, Verdansk really defined what we know as Warzone. And I hope that Warzone can learn from Verdansk. You know, I hope it can learn from its mistakes. I hope it can learn from what it did well and kind of build towards making a better Warzone map in the future. But then again, that's just my opinion. I mean, all this is just my opinion. So if you made it this far, why don't you go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what you think the legacy of Verdansk is going to be moving forward with Warzone. Thank you so much for watching this retrospective. Hit like if you enjoyed it. Of course, you can always subscribe to the channel for more content. Everybody stay gold.